How's it going, everybody? Welcome to my channel. Today we have a very good problem for you guys, right? It's called odd and even linked list, right? So it's just a very good problem, so make sure you pay close attention to the problem statement, right? So it says given the head of a singular linked list, right? Group all the nodes with odd indices together, followed by the node even indices, right? And return the reordered list, right? Okay. So he says the first node is considered to be odd and the second node is considered to be even, right? And so on and so forth, right? Note that the relative order inside both of the even and odd groups should remain as it was in the input, right? We must solve the problem of an extra space and of n time complexity, right? You can see a very, very concise and simple problem statement, right? So we'll be given this linked list, right? And we need to group all the nodes, all the odd nodes together, right? And group all the even nodes together as well, right? And after grouping them together, we can simply just, connect them together and then send it back to the caller, right? To the solution, right? So let's go through this example, right? To solidify the ask, right? So you can see we have a list. That's the original list. And this is the output list that we send them, right? So you can see that the ask was we need to group all the odd indices, right? And the first node is considered to be index one, right? That's what they said here, right? And let's say that it's odd, right? So we consider it to be index one, right? And the second node is even, right? So we're gonna call this the second node is gonna be index two, pretty much, right? Okay. And then that way, guys, right? We can, so you can see the first index is a group with all the odd indices, right? So this is index one, index two, 3, and index 5, right? And then you see that this is how they're connected, right? And then now the even indices, right, are also grouped by, right, 2, index 4, right? So you can see that it's partitioned that way, right? So that all the odd indices, right, are in the first part of the list, and the even indices, right, nodes are on the right side, right, the second part of the list, right? That's how we just simply return them, guys, right? It's as simple as that, right? Yeah, so the second example is pretty similar. You can see it's the same kind of thought, right? You can see all the index 1, right? Connects to index 3, index 5, index 7, right? So you can see all the odd indices or nodes are on the first part of the list, and the even indices are on the second part of the list, right? You can see that it's not based on their value, right? It's based on their indices, right? Their index, where they're positioned, right? That's why, you can see, all the odd indices are on the first portion, right? And you can see it also says that we need to maintain the relative order of things, right? So yeah, so how do we solve this problem, right? So we know that we need to, group them, right? Partition it in a way, right? That way, right? So how do we do that, guys, right? So that we need to do it in constant space, right? So we can't use additional data structures to kind of help us solve this problem, right? So that's out the window, right? And we know that it has to be a linear time complexity, right? So it has to be some sort of a linear loop, right, to solve this, guys, right? And a lot of the traversal that we know of for linked lists, right, they're mostly linear time, right? So we're good on that, right? The traversals, right? So we need to traverse, right? So we need to do it. So how do we do it, right? As we're traversing, what we can do, guys, right, is to kind of rearrange, right? What we need to do, right? So instead of, say for example, right, so we want 1 somehow to point to 3, right? So we're gonna pretty much, as we're looping through, we're gonna have to rearrange the pointers, right? Do some pointer manipulations, right? Pointer manipulation techniques to solve this, guys, right? So yeah, exactly what we're gonna do, guys, right? So let's go to my drawing board, right? It'll make a lot more sense, and hopefully, you guys can understand, right, the process when I'm trying to, what I'm saying. So we're given, so we'll be given, like, so you see that the first index, right, the first node is the, start of the odd nodes, right? And the second one is going to be the start of the even nodes, guys, right? And then we're going to build the lists, the two lists that we need, right, accordingly, right? So that's how we're going to group them by like that first, right? And then at the end, right, we're going to connect them together, right? And return that big list that we need, right? The output list that we need, guys, right? So you can see this one, right? So first pointer points to the first index, right? First node, in the second P2 is the head of the even list, right? So now we're gonna iterate through, guys, right? So we want 1, right? We don't want 1 to point to 2, right? We want to change the pointer, right? So this is where the pointer manipulation comes into play, right? So we erase that and we make it point to this guy, right? So it points to the next node, right? And then the same thing, we don't want 2 to point to this one, right? Because that's index 3, right? We want to point to index 4. So we're simply just not point here, right? We point there, guys, right? Okay, that's how we do it, right? So how it's gonna work, guys, right? So see, for every node, for every like pointer, right? We want to skip whatever node, direct node that we're pointing at, right? But we want to point to the next node, right? What I'm saying. So you can see the first pointer, right? Doesn't want to point to this one, right? Because it will be even, right? And so we point to the next odd node, right? And then the same thing for the P2, right? Which is the pointer that we're using to iterate, right? The one doesn't want to point to an odd node, right? Because that's index 3. We want to point to the next node so that we can, yeah. Yeah, so we do we increment it, right? Instead of doing let's say for example odd one, right? So cur that next points to 2. We do it cur that next points to the whatever node this guy's pointing to. We point to it right there, guys, right? So we could do cur that next, right? So that's how we change the pointer manipulation here, right? And then after we do the connection, guys, right? What we're gonna do is simply move them forward, right? Because they both need to move forward, guys, right? After they do the connection, right? So I point here, right? Then now, I like when it does that, right? Cool. So it moves forward. So I point here, right? And then we do the same thing, right? We don't want to point to the direct node, right? We want to change the pointer, right? Because we want to group them by indices, right? So P1, so 3, instead of pointing to this guy, right? Points to 5, right? Then remember the last node is pointing to null, right? Remember that. And then the same thing, right? We don't want to point to this thing. We want to point to whatever is pointing. My next node is pointing at, right? So I point to null, right? So just like that, we rearrange the pointer, right? So now it should look like that, right? So let's say the even one, right? The odd. Let's show the odd one, right? So the odd one is like this, right? 1, 3, right? Because I'm just following the pointer, right? So I'm not pointing to no. 1 points to 3, right? And 3 points to 5, right? The connections have changed, right? I'm saying. And then the 5 points to null, right? All right. So now the even list, right? It looks like that, right? So 2, right? This is a 2, believe it or not, right? And then 2 points to 4, right? Like we were doing, right? Then 4 points to null, right? Right there. Okay. So now what we're gonna do is, once we're done, right? So I didn't finish the walkthrough, so this guy will, go into net and be null, right? And then we would be out of nodes to, connect. And then we would exit, right? Just like that, right? And then now you can see that the odd list, right? The last node is pointing, so this pointer is pointing to the last node of the odd list that we're creating, right? So what we're gonna do, right, is to make it point to the head of the even list, right? So it's why we're gonna do this connection here, right? So we could conclude the problem, right? So we do this check right here, right? Okay, it points to this one, right? That's why we end up with this answer that we're given. So we see 1, 3, 5, right? Points to 2, 4, right? So that's kind of at the end. That's how it looks like. 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, right? Null, right? So it doesn't point to null, right, anymore. And now it points to 5 points to the 2, right? Which is the head of the even list that we created, right? So hopefully it makes sense, right? So there's a very good example, right? So the second example is pretty similar as the first one, right? It's the same thing, right? So let's say we have this kind of setup, right? So for example, let's go through it real quick. So we're gonna be changing pointers, right? So we're not gonna point here. The odd is gonna point to this guy, right? And then this one's gonna point to this person, right? And then we're gonna go forward, right? Go on to the next node so that we can increment, right? Okay. Next for us is to so you see that we need to account for so now this 4, right? So it should be pointing to my next node, right? So if we do cur that next, right, we would get exception, right? So we're gonna be checking, right? So the while loop that we're going to have, right, is going to be checking if the even, right, because the even is going to be the one getting to be null first, right? So that's what we have here, guys, right? Okay, so we're going to be checking if cure.next, if the even iterator, right, p2.next is not null as well, right, will be one of the exit conditions in our while loop, right? You know, it's kind of what I'm mentioning here, guys, right? Hopefully it makes sense, right? So let's quickly go into the code. I think it's gonna help us bring home the thought, right, that the solution, right, is gonna make a lot more sense, right? So we're gonna have a even head, right? Because it's gonna help us and capture, like, be able to, you know, connect the two lists that we're creating, right? Which is an odd list and an even list, right? Okay, so what's next for us to do? We're gonna need to have some cure odd, right? It's gonna be equal to head, right? And then cure even points to the even head, right? Okay. So yeah, that's the original setup, right? So now after that, we're gonna start having a linear loop, guys, right? So while the cure even is not null, and cure even that next as well is not null, right? So just doing that to not get exceptions, right? Because we're gonna be doing cure that next, right? So once we have that, guys, what we're gonna do is to let's start connecting the odd list, right? So we're gonna do cure that next, right? So this is how we're doing the manipulation of pointers here, right? Cure odd next, right? I want to point to whatever this guy's point. So 1 wants to point to whatever 2 is pointing to, right? So that's how we simulate the skipping of, right, of that node, right? So I'm not pointing to that anymore, I'm pointing to this one, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing here, right? So now I point to whatever it's pointing to, right? Okay. And then what we're going to do is to just move it forward, guys, right? I think we are in the clear after that, right? So this is just moving it to this guy, right? 3. All right. So then we do the same thing for the even thing, right? Even cure even. That next, cure even, that next, right? So I skip the one I'm pointing to. I point to the next one, right? And then we do the same thing, cure even, and we move it forward, right, after we do the connection. Okay. And after that, I think we should be in good shape, right? And then the next thing for us to do is to connect the two lists, guys, remember? So now the cure odd is at the end, right? So cure that odd that next should be pointing to the even head, right? Which were captured at the top, right? I told you guys what was needed, right? And after that, you could just return the head there. You should be good to go, right? And then since we can, they said that we can be given like an empty, right? So we're going to this condition here. Say head is go to null, or head that next go to null. Simply return head. Right? Okay, so hopefully it makes sense, right? So we got those two pointers that's gonna help us to create the new list, right? So we group them by odd and even ones, right? You know, right? And we construct the list, and then at the end, right, we connect the two lists together that we just created, right? And then we're good to go, right? Looks good to me. Let's press submit. Awesome, guys. We'll pass all these test cases, guys. If you guys found value, you guys understood the thought process in the comment section. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe because we'll be doing a lot of other videos just like this one. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.